Welcome to the forum about the upcoming General Assembly of the Unitarian Universalist Association and proposed changes to Article 2. And we begin, as we so often do, with too many things in our hands. All right. We light our chalice today with these words by Eric Walker Wickstrom. Here today, in this place and with these people, may we listen so that we can hear. May we hear so that we can feel. May we feel so that we can know. And may we know so that we can change ourselves and this world. May this chalice we light our way. Thank you again. So what we plan to accomplish today in this forum is to talk a bit more about General Assembly, what that is, how we will be hosting watch parties here at OUC, and what the whole process of voting delegates is. And then updates about Article 2. And Article 2 is of the purposes and principles in the bylaws of the Unitarian Universalist Association. So that is the preview of what we will do here today. And I'm going to close these doors so we've got a little bit. No coffee, yeah. And the other mic too, Kate, if we could. We'll need them both. Thanks.
Okay. Would it be easier if we just pass the mic back and forth?
Is the bottom of it turned off?
Oh, yeah. Knowing how, there we go, knowing how to work a microphone. It became part of my ministerial responsibilities, that's for sure.
For sure.
So, General Assembly will happen in June. It is the 20th to the 23rd. And the theme for this year is Love Unites, Stories Ignite. Yeah, nice theme. There's a theme every year, and all of the worship services will take that theme into consideration, and a lot of the workshops as well. And this year, General Assembly is all virtual, like it was during COVID. My sense from the General Assembly is that they'll probably rotate back and forth between an on-site multi-platform GA and an online GA for reasons of accessibility and also for reasons of cost. It's a lot less expensive to do an online GA than it is to do an on-site GA. So that's what that looks like. So General Assembly is a time when we worship together. General Assembly opens with a worship service, and there are various worship services throughout, including a bridging synergy service to bridge youth. There's a Living Traditions service, the Service of the Living Tradition, which is to mark the transitions in ministers and religious educators and musicians. So ministers who are newly ordained, ministers who are retiring, ministers who have died, as well as other religious professionals. And we learn together. There's workshops and those kinds of things at General Assembly. So the next slide there, Sarah. So these are some of the things that are happening. As they say, where? It's in your home, your space, your connection. So, so very accessible. And there are some easy ways to engage with General Assembly that we'll talk about for everyone. So, Reverend Sara.
So part of the process of General Assembly is also about doing the business of our association. This is when the congregations can come together to vote on matters that are of importance to all of us as Unitarian Universalists. And voting delegates are assigned based on the size of the membership of a congregation. So for OUUC, we have 7 delegates based on our membership numbers, as well as ministers and religious educators are also automatic delegates as well. So we have additional delegate spots for Reverend Mary, for myself, and for Reverend Carol. So this year so far, our delegates are Lee Doyle and Beth Johnson, Tiffany Felch, and Riley Urich. We do have space for 3 additional voting delegates, and so if you're interested, reach out, let me know. There's a variety of different registration levels that they're doing now for General Assembly, and so there's a registration for the full General Assembly that includes workshops, learning opportunities. That's at one price. There's a business-only registration, which is for being there for the business meetings and for being able to vote, but not including workshops and learning opportunities, and that's at a different registration price. And for all of these, if funds are an issue for you and you would like to attend General Assembly, a couple of years back at the auction, we did raise the paddle for a General Assembly scholarship fund, and it is still healthy and well. And so anyone who would like to attend General Assembly, please just let us know, because we do have the funds to make that possible for anyone. So if you want to attend General Assembly or you want to be a delegate, you don't have to be able to do the full Thursday or Wednesday evening through Sunday programming. You don't have to be tied to your computer the entire time. It's okay to pick and choose. In fact, we encourage that. And I will be hosting watch parties here, so folks who wanted to do it together can come to OUC and we'll watch the business meetings and be able to talk about it. And all of the voting, they've really switched it where you don't have to be live in the moment to vote, but rather the ballot comes out and you go in and cast your vote within a window of time. So even if there's some scheduling conflicts, that doesn't mean that you couldn't be a voting delegate, because the voting doesn't have to be live right at a certain time. So it's very flexible, and we'll be doing it together, and it'll be fun. So yeah, reach out if you'd like to join the delegate team. I think that's back to you.
Go ahead.
Okay. So the big thing that we're voting on this year, that Reverend Mary talked about in the worship service earlier, that makes this a historic General Assembly, is that we are looking at Article 2 of the UUA bylaws. Now, Article 2, as it currently it contains the 7 principles and the 6 sources. And it's actually in the bylaws that we need to return and, as an association, examine Article 2 on a regular basis. So the reason why we're doing it right now is because that was always the plan. This is a living tradition, a living document, and so it's right in there that we come back on a regular basis to talk about Article 2 and whether it represents what is our purpose and our commonality as Unitarian Universalists right now. So the process has been long and multi-year. We've been talking about it here at OUC for multiple years. And in that process, there was a study commission formed, and they engaged with Unitarian Universalists in a variety of different ways, and came up with a draft proposal which have these 7 values, which we've been exploring all year here at OUC as well. And so the image, some people have called this like the flower of our values. This is the image that shows those values with love placed at the center. And we'll talk a little bit more about all of this.
So just a little bit then about how we got here in the first place. So it was at so let me just take a step way back. The Unitarian Universalist Association is the association of covenanted congregations. So it exists of all of the congregations that are part of the association. And so the Article 2 and all of the bylaws apply to our agreements that we have with other congregations that we're in relationship with, right? And the bylaws actually say that the principles and purposes are to be revisited every 15 years. And they haven't been for many, many years. It was last in 2010 that proposed changes went before the General Assembly and were not adopted. So it's actually been 14 years this time since it was even revisited. So it was definitely time. And the principles and purposes that exist now were adopted in 1985, as I mentioned. So the 7 principles and the 6 sources are much beloved. We preach from them, we teach from them, they're posted outside of our sanctuary doors here. And there's some worry and some grief about letting go of those principles. What I would say is those principles are encompassed in the descriptions of the values, and we can talk about the 7 values, but it is handy, and we're pretty used to the 7 principles and the 6 sources, and there have been lots of opportunities and discussion about changing them. So at General Assembly in 2020, so almost 4 years ago now, the Article 2 Study Commission was charged by the board of the UUA to revisit the principles and purposes, Article 2, because it was time. And so they've been working for 4 years in order to get us to this point. So there have been many, many meetings, many drafts, many feedback sessions, many proposed amendments, and there's proposed amendments to be voted on at GA this year that Reverend Sara is going to talk about. At one point I looked up so as of last fall, over the course of their work, the commission had 45 feedback sessions, 4,600 with 4,600 participants. They did videos that reached almost 8,000 viewers, and they had 29 surveys that generated a total of almost 11,000 responses. So they've done a really magnificent job, I think, of getting as much feedback as possible and reaching out to lots of different Unitarian Universalists with different identities for their feedback. So where we are now is last General Assembly in GA 2023, there was a vote to continue study this year, because we never vote on something just once. We have to vote multiple times. So the vote last year was to continue study this year. We received a final draft in the fall. There's amendments to that. And the final vote will be at General Assembly this year. So it is indeed a historic vote. Whichever way it goes, it will be a historic vote. So you want to talk about the proposed amendments?
So the process for getting amendments to this year's General Assembly, they needed to come in by a deadline, and they needed to have a certain number of congregations sign on endorsing them as an amendment. 4 amendments met all of those hurdles to be placed on the business agenda and come up for a vote at this year's General Assembly. So we will have 4 amendments to vote on separately. An amendment will have to get a 3/4 vote in order to be adopted into the final Article 2 that will then be voted on. So the 4 amendments that are up for vote, 2 of them make some changes to the language about the equity value, and 2 of them propose an additional value beyond the 7 values that were already there. So, with the equity value, one of the amendments is to change language from worth to worthy. Now, it can feel like a really minor change, but for the folks who have brought it forth, the reason is it was particularly brought forth by people who who are descended from African Americans who have been enslaved, and that for enslaved people to be assigned worth is not about having your own inherent worthiness. It's about having a dollar value placed upon a person. And recognizing that history around that language is the reason for this amendment. So changing it from inherent worth to is inherently worthy. That's one proposed amendment. The other is to add a third sentence to the descriptive language of equity. And part of the rationale that was lifted up for this is that it brings it in alignment with all the other values that got more words given to them, and that equity was a little bit shorter than all the rest, didn't have as much description. And so they've proposed this, that we add a third sentence saying, equity calls us to listen, understand, respect, and respond to one another. So that is a second separate amendment about equity. These will be voted on separately. And like I said, each one will need to get 3/4 of the vote if it's to be moved forward into the final Article 2 language. Then we have an amendment proposed to add the value of peace, to make this an additional value on that circle around love. And the language would be this: peace. We dedicate ourselves to peaceful conflict resolution at all levels. We covenant to promote a peaceful world community with liberty and human rights for all. Whenever and wherever possible, we will support nonviolent means to achieve peace. So that, if it were to be voted on, it will be an additional value, bringing us to 8 or 9 instead of 7 values. Because the next amendment is to add another value, the value of reason. And the proposed language around that is reason. We search for truth and meaning informed by reason, evidence, and the results of science, motivated by wonder, curiosity, and compassion. We covenant to listen to and respect the views of others and to remain open to new ideas. Each of these is a separate amendment, so it would be possible that we may find that one passes and the other doesn't, or that both pass, and then they are added to the Article 2 values. So we've been talking about Article 2 for a while now, and we've been collecting the resources as we do so in this Padlet that will be made available again. The link has been shared a few times, and we'll share it again in our weekly announcements. And that's just a place where we're trying to make it easier for you to go back and look at old recordings of other forums and to stay abreast with all of this Article 2 business.
There's a ton of resources on this Padlet, including a coloring book, right? And forums and meditations, the things we've done, the study commissions, reports, all of those kinds of things. So if you really want to take a deep dive, this is a good place to go. So I think we just want to open it up then to what questions do you have? Do you have questions? Do you have concerns? Are there things that you want to chat about related to this? And we'll bring the microphone around. Got it? Mm-hmm.
So if one is going to be a delegate, I wondered if the responsibilities I wonder about the responsibilities to vote. So how does one represent our congregation? Mm-hmm. How does one know how they would like us to vote? Is that something we should make sure we do? And then how do we report back what we've learned after the whole assembly is over?
Great questions, Pat. So the first part about representing the congregation. What we've said to delegates in past years is to vote your conscience. Certainly talk to your communities, and ask people. Last year, for the first time, we held a forum where all the delegates were present and asked the congregation to engage with this question. And I'll say there was conversation, but the delegates did not get a clear direction from the congregation. It was mostly vote your conscience. So that's that's the best advice I can give. What some congregations do is they engage in a year-long process, and they might take a congregational vote. We elected not to do that this year here. And then the second part of your question was, reporting back. So there's a couple different ways that's going to happen. If Article 2 passes, you can bet you're going to hear about it, from us in worship and those kinds of things. We're looking to use the Soul Matters packets again next year. That's the group that puts out the information for our Soul Matters groups based on the spiritual themes. And the themes are related to Article 2 again next year. It's a different set of words from the Article 2 Commission. So even if it doesn't pass, we'll be revisiting some of those. What we've asked in the past is if delegates would want to report back to the congregation either in a forum or in a worship service about what their experience was. We haven't had people take us up on that, but if you're interested in that, we'd be happy to welcome that.
So as a follow-up question to that answer, then if we decided ahead of time, for instance, that some of us would want to report back, then we would want to consider covering as many sessions as we could, right? So we might divide them up in some way.
You could.
What's been done in the past here? Has that happened, that there's been reporting back from people in various ways?
Yeah, so we have had, I think we did do a worship service several years ago of folks who attended General Assembly, because when I arrived, for many years, there hadn't been any delegates from this congregation who were congregants, except for the minister and Reverend Sara and Reverend Carol. So it really was an effort to, okay, folks, this is part of our responsibility as a covenantal community. So we have had a worship service before. We could have a forum. If you decide you want to share attending the business meetings, you certainly could do that. I will say, last General Assembly, most of us here attended online. Reverend Sara was on site in, was it Pittsburgh? Those of us who were online here, we gathered in the youth room and we watched every business meeting together, and it was way more fun and way more interesting, because we could say, what just happened? And did they really just say that? And yeah, so it really does make it a lot more fun to do them together, and the time went more quickly.
So we also have typically put together like a group chat for delegates so that we can be texting each other as well. So if somebody can't make it to the view party but wants to be like, hey, what happened? They could also text the group. I do want to say one thing about how we've had more delegate participation in recent years. It's also so much easier than it used to be. Previously you had to travel to General Assembly, and it was really wildly expensive to get all the delegates there. So unless it happened to be geographically close to you, now we can actually have all of our delegates vote, because the voting online is so much more accessible. It's so much more accessible.
So the view parties, how are they going to be organized? Are here together, are people going to view all the business meetings? Are you going to select certain, other meetings that all of us might want to watch together?
Yeah, so I'm going to be hosting here in the youth room. We might have popcorn. I don't know. We'll have snacks. And we'll have the business meetings for sure. We may do some of the in-gathering or other meetings as well. It's going to depend a little bit on the schedule of the delegates. So once we have everybody once we know who all of our delegates are, I'll ask, are there sessions that nobody can attend? Because if it's going to be just me coming in and setting up the TV and nobody could attend anyway, we may not do that one. But as much as possible, yes, we're planning on hosting it here and being together. It'll be more fun. Oh yeah, popcorn.
A couple of things. One is the non-business meetings there's several things going on at the same time.
Yes.
So, and it's really interesting and fun to go to those. I've been to, when it was in Portland, I went to the meeting. So that's an interesting subject to me, of whether or not planning ahead or something like that. If more than one person wants to go to some of the sessions, then that. And also, is it a rule that if somebody's not a delegate and hasn't paid to attend GA, are they not allowed to come and be at your watch party or do that stuff?
That's a good question, and that has come up so far on the General Assembly forum, that other people have been asking this question there. So the answer I saw was that, in fact, we're not supposed to broadcast this to people who aren't registered unless it's the public worship that's open to everyone. So, their ask is that if you weren't registered for workshops, that we don't share the workshop broadcast. So if you're the business only registration, it's just the business meetings. And that folks who aren't registered at all, we also are not supposed to share the broadcast with. So if you want to be part of the party, get registered.
And I'll just mention, so on site at General Assembly, if you're ever there in person, you get a badge, right? You get a little name tag that gives you access to the conference center to begin with, and then to all of the workshops. So there isn't a badge like that exists for virtual, so they're counting on us to keep that. Yeah. So you mind if we go up here, Pat? All right.
So this will be my third year, I think, being a delegate. And the first year, it was virtual because it was during COVID. And last year, coming in for the watch parties, it just was so much better. As you said, Reverend Mary, the understanding, the being there, that kind of thing. And this year, popcorn, yeah. And then the other thing, I was totally taken aback by how much emotion there is around the 7 principles and the 6, thank you, yes, sources. I mean, there were people crying as they were talking about the fact that they didn't want to see them go. So if this doesn't pass, then it will go back to, wow, that's going to be interesting. Okay, that's what
And what I'll say about that is, I would suggest that emotion is about identity, right? It's how we say who we are to the rest of the world. What's our identity as a denomination and how we present ourselves in the world? And that's changing. And some folks don't want to let go of that identity because it's changed and they're very connected to, yeah. And so last year we heard people say, it was the 7 principles that brought me here. You can't, you can't change those, right?
So this is a rather complex comment, but in my lifetime, I find that I have changed revolutionary changes in my life every 7 years. And what I really love about where we are today with the principles is that I can identify with each of those statements. I'm not obligated to meet any of your other standards. I just have to find my standard, my level of understanding, my level of spirit, and follow the covenants to be in covenant with one another. But this is geared to help me grow as a human being. That's what I really love about where we are today and what we're voting on.
I'm very sorry if this has been asked because I came in late because I was having an important conversation. But are there other votes happening, business resolutions that are like things that the congregation should be talking about? Because there was an important one last year too, that came from the youth. I'm talking, and hope, please correct me if I'm, about divesting from certain investments, and maybe Mary could talk about what I can't remember right now. But so are there other votes that we should be talking about here?
Reverend Sara, you've been keeping track of the other, so there's things that we know about ahead of time, and there's things that happen at General Assembly.
Yeah. So there have not been any other business resolutions that have already been announced that are likely to cause any controversy. The ones that the board is putting forth now are very small things, like we're going to change the bylaws to say that this committee no longer says we'll be 7 people, it says it'll be a minimum of 7 people, or changes like that that are very much just in the weeds of associational business, and are unlikely to have any debate. But at General Assembly, things come forward. There's actions of immediate witness are proposed, and there's always more actions of immediate witness than will be adopted. So there's a process of voting on which of those actions of immediate witness have the most support. And so that process isn't something that we can announce ahead of time, but as it does get rolling, we will obviously be as delegates talking about that.
And just for clarification, the business resolution last year was brought by the youth to bring to light that the UU Common Endowment Fund that OUC's endowment funds are invested in is not fully divested from fossil fuels. That they're partially divested, but there was language passed back in the day that allowed for some fossil fuel companies to be invested in by the Common Endowment Fund, and the youth wanted there to be total divestment, and it did not pass. So there's been more conversations this year. And my sense is that folks really want to hold up the Article 2 vote as kind of the big thing for this year, because it is.
What kind of participation do we as online parts of the conference, the assembly, how is that organized, and how often do we get to participate with what they're doing?
So there's a number of different ways that online folks can participate. There's lots of chat rooms. So there's a online space called WOVA, I don't know, WOVA, however you say that. And so you get if you register, you get a login and you go to that platform, and then you can join any of the breakout rooms. And there's rooms that are by identity, there's rooms by geography, there's all different ways that people separate themselves. And so within a chat room, you can be chatting with other people. And you'll see things like what just happened, and what does that mean, and how can I get more information? Folks often will go between the chat rooms until they find one they're comfortable in. So that's one way people interact virtually. The other is that when there's discussion about a particular topic, there's moderators, facilitators of General Assembly, very skilled people, by the way. I think they do a good job. They'll set a certain amount of time for discussion, and so there's a way to register that you want to speak, and they'll just go through the list. And often there's more people who want to speak than there's time for, because there's time limits on the discussion, but they include as many people as they can, and they ask people to keep their remarks brief so that more people can speak. Does that answer your question, Pat? So I think they do the best they can. When General Assembly is also on site, they go back and forth. One on-site comment, one online comment, one on-site, one online. But this will be all online.
Yeah, and last year when it was mixed format, on-site and virtual, they still had the people who were delivering on-site comments go off into a little box and get in there by themselves and then be broadcast up on the screen, so that there was not a difference between how you appeared if you were a virtual off-site delegate versus an in-person delegate, that everybody was still, you know, in a little Zoom box, whether they were in the room or not. Speaking of Zoom boxes, do we have any questions or comments from our online folks?
All I see is
That's interesting. It has been put in the chat. Yeah, great. All right, coming back to you, Pat.
Have we heard ahead of time if anyone's going to enter some sort of resolution about the war in Gaza?
My guess is that that might be an action of immediate witness. I won't be surprised if there's something. And the action of immediate witness is typically related to a social justice issue, and it's that, you know, we want to say something about this as a denomination, and then that'll be voted on. So that's how I expect that would happen. Action of immediate witness, that's right. Mm-hmm.
The other format that things sometimes are placed in is that they become a study issue for the whole association. And so when a study issue is adopted at General Assembly, what that is to encourage all UUs to spend the next year engaging with study and action around it. So sometimes in the past, that's been another avenue for something like, you know, we want to study our relationship to peace and nonviolence, and it might be lifted up in that way as well.
I'll just mention that there is a group called UUs for Peace in the Middle East. They've existed for a long time. And some congregations have groups that are connected to that, just like, you know, this congregation used to have a UU United Nations group. And so if you're particularly interested in that, let us know and we'll get you connected. Any other questions, comments? Thank you for your engagement. So next steps. The next steps are, if you're interested in being a delegate, talk to Reverend Sara. If you want to just attend General Assembly, there's links all over the place. You can just Google UUA GA 2024 and you'll get to the place where you can register. If you want to attend and you'd like some financial assistance, you can talk to Reverend Sara or me. We're happy to do that. It was a Raise the Paddle a couple years ago from the auction that created a fund so that we can help people go to General Assembly. So thank you for that. It's really been a gift to many people. So it'll be Thursday through Sunday in June, third week of June, always. So thank you again for your engagement and your interest. So then we'll extinguish our chalice, because that's what we do. These words are from Melissa Jetter. We extinguish this chalice today, but we are illuminated by a faith that allows us to sit and think. In this quiet time, we can reflect in solitude, meditating on love, and growing out of our comfort. Though we experience discomfort, we are excited to give birth to a new and just world. Thank you all.